The Appalachian Mountains are vast, ancient, and unforgiving. People go in, and sometimes they never come back out. In September 2017, a 32-year-old woman named Jasmine Kensington stepped into those mountains for what should have been a 5-day solo trek. She was a seasoned hiker, prepared, confident, and determined. But Jasmine never returned. For 6 long years, her disappearance remained a haunting mystery, until a group of explorers stumbled upon a strange electromagnetic signal pulsing from deep inside a hidden cave. What they uncovered next would shatter every theory investigators thought they knew. Before we dive into this chilling true story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale of the world's most haunting mysteries. On September 17, 2017, Jasmine should have walked out of the wilderness. She should have driven back into town, sent her brother Andrew a quick text, something like, "I'm alive, filthy, and exhausted," and then laughed as she told him stories about her trek. But no message ever came. Andrew waited, pacing between his phone and the kitchen window. His sister was strong, independent, and endlessly capable. She'd hiked countless trails before. A sprained ankle, a blocked trail, those things could explain a delay. He repeated this to himself like a mantra. But by September 19th, 2 days overdue, his rationalizations collapsed into dread. He picked up the phone and called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher was calm, professional, and took down the details. Jasmine Kensington, 32 years old, experienced hiker, last seen driving a sedan to a remote trailhead. That afternoon, a ranger drove the winding gravel road to check the parking lot. There it was, Jasmine's car, parked neatly under an oak tree. Dust and pollen coated its hood, proof that it hadn't moved in days. The discovery was a double-edged sword. She had made it safely to the trailhead, but she had never come back out. By the next morning, the full search began. At first, it was a model of efficiency. A command post sprang up around her car, white tents, maps spread across folding tables, radios buzzing, and rangers pacing with clipboards. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs were deployed with scent articles taken from Jasmine's apartment. But within hours, the problems began. The scent trails went cold just a few hundred yards from the parking lot. The forest floor was damp, complex, and confusing. From above, the helicopter's thermal imaging revealed nothing but endless canopies of late summer green. For days, search teams scoured the mountains. They checked ravines, creek beds, and ridges. They hiked off trail into places where you could vanish with just one wrong step. And still, they found nothing. Not a footprint, not a broken branch, not a single sign that Jasmine had walked that way. Andrew stayed at the command post, quietly watching maps being marked and erased. He handed out donuts and coffee he couldn't bring himself to drink. Every hour without news felt heavier than the last. By the 8th day, hope flickered. A volunteer team reported finding a turquoise scrap of fabric snagged on a branch over a muddy creek bed, eerily close in color to Jasmine's jacket. Excitement surged. Rangers redirected the entire operation to that swampy area. Tracking teams, helicopters, forensics, all focused on this single lead. But after 2 days of brutal searching through mud and thorns, the truth crushed them. Under the magnifying lamp, investigators realized the scrap wasn't from Jasmine's jacket at all. It was cheap nylon from an old fishing vest, litter, left behind by someone years earlier. The hope that had ignited the search vanished instantly. Rain came next, cold, endless rain that turned the ground to sucking mud and shrouded the mountains in fog. Helicopters couldn't fly. Streams overflowed into dangerous torrents. On the 14th day, search coordinator Frank Miller sat with Andrew and broke the news gently. They had covered more than 100 square miles. They had no new leads. The official large-scale search had to be suspended. The white tents came down. Volunteers packed up their gear. Police cruisers and ranger trucks rumbled away. Soon, only Jasmine's car remained in that lonely gravel lot, a silent reminder of a life cut off mid-stride. Friends and strangers still searched for a few weekends, desperate to find anything. But by October, the leaves had turned red and gold, blanketing the ground with a new layer of silence. The Appalachian wilderness had swallowed Jasmine whole, 2 years passed. Andrew's grief dulled into a chronic ache. Jasmine's belongings were boxed and stored away. Her job filled her position. Life moved on, but for Andrew, there was only emptiness where his sister's voice should have been. The case sat inactive, a bureaucratic term for dead end. Jasmine Kensington had become another ghost story whispered along the Appalachian Trail. But in 2019, everything changed. Another young woman vanished while hiking, this time more than 100 miles south of where Jasmine had disappeared. Unlike Jasmine, she was found, but she had been brutally murdered, her body left in a shallow grave near the trail. Detective Wallace of the Regional Cold Case Unit saw the news and felt a jolt of unease. A lone female hiker, remote wilderness, a predator bold enough to strike. Could the two cases be connected? For the first time in 2 years, Jasmine's file was pulled back onto a desk. The possibility no one had wanted to voice was now impossible to ignore. Maybe Jasmine hadn't been lost to the wilderness. Maybe she had crossed paths with something far more terrifying. Detective Wallace studied the file late into the night, flipping through reports that felt more like fragments of a ghost story than an investigation. He saw the photo Andrew had provided back in 2017. Jasmine perched on a mossy tree, smiling brightly, her orange cap cocked back on her brown hair, her blue jacket sharp against the green. It was the face of a woman who had seemed unstoppable, confident, alive. Yet here she was, frozen in time, lost somewhere between the ridges of the Appalachians and the silence of the unknown. When he compared her disappearance to the new case, the murdered hiker found in 2019, his stomach tightened. It wasn't proof, not by any means, but the echoes were undeniable. Both women had been strong, independent hikers. Both had walked alone into the wilderness. One had disappeared into a void. The other had been brutally silenced. Wallace couldn't shake the thought. Maybe Jasmine hadn't fallen into the clutches of nature at all. Maybe she had crossed paths with a predator. The first step was retracing the lives of those closest to her. The circle was small. Jasmine had been private, more comfortable in the woods than at cocktail parties. She had her brother Andrew, a handful of friends, and one name that stood out more than the rest: Nathan Coldridge, her colleague from the architectural firm, and the man who was supposed to join her on that September trip. In 2017, Nathan had been sidelined by a sudden illness the day before the hike. His alibi had seemed airtight: medical records, IV fluids, even the clinic visit had been verified. Still, the shift in the case demanded a second look. If Jasmine hadn't been lost, if she had been taken, then someone close to her may have known more than they had ever admitted. Wallace and his partner met Nathan at a coffee shop, 2 years after Jasmine had disappeared. Time had aged him. The easy confidence he once carried seemed eroded, replaced by a haunted weariness. When they explained the new theory, that Jasmine might have been murdered, not lost, Nathan's face drained of color. His hands trembled as he cradled his mug. He described again the night before the trip, how they'd been planning every detail, tracing their fingers over maps, sharing their excitement. Then the sudden sickness that left him incapacitated, vomiting, barely able to stand. He admitted the guilt was crushing. He had been meant to go with her. If he had, maybe she would still be alive. The detectives pressed gently. Could anyone confirm his condition? Could he remember the exact timeline? Nathan mentioned the urgent care clinic again. Wallace nodded, filing the detail away. The next day, they pulled the records. The timestamps were precise. Nathan had checked in at 10:15 the morning Jasmine began her hike. The physician's notes detailed dehydration, vomiting, acute food poisoning. Payment records confirmed he had been there. His alibi was airtight. Nathan Coldridge was not their suspect. But the interview had done something important. It reframed the case. Jasmine's disappearance was no longer a simple accident. It was being reclassified, quietly but firmly, as suspected foul play. For a time, the files stirred with new life. Investigators combed through surrounding towns, looking for predators with histories of violence. They found suspects here and there, men with past charges, names that whispered of danger, but nothing tied them to Jasmine. Every lead collapsed into dust. By 2020, the file grew cold again. It sat in Wallace's office like a weight, one more case swallowed by silence. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Jasmine's name was no longer synonymous with a lost hiker. It carried the darker shadow of something hunted, something taken. Years passed, technology advanced, the trail remained frozen. And then, in the fall of 2023, 6 years after Jasmine's disappearance, a discovery shattered the quiet. 3 men, hobbyists who called themselves the Appalachian Geological Survey Group, had been exploring a remote slope deep in the mountains. They weren't searching for people, they were chasing magnetic anomalies, the strange invisible signatures hidden beneath the earth. Armed with an EMF meter, they wandered terrain almost no one touched. The leader, Marcus, stopped abruptly. His device chirped to life, spiking from silence into a screaming signal, 87 milligauss, impossibly strong, isolated to a 5-foot circle. There were no power lines, no equipment, nothing man-made for miles. Something beneath the soil was broadcasting. Clearing away the leaves, they uncovered a fissure in the earth. It wasn't a wide cave mouth, but a narrow crack, 3 feet across, hidden beneath the roots of a toppled tree. Cold, damp air exhaled from its depths. The EMF reading held steady, pulsing from the darkness. Marcus rigged himself into a harness, strapped on a headlamp, and lowered in. At 10 feet, the walls opened into a vast vertical chamber. His light searched the black, glinting off wet stone, before catching on something far below, a splash of colour. A sleeping bag. A backpack. When he climbed back to the surface, his words were measured but trembling. There's gear down there. Looks old. A bag, a pack. But the signal, it's coming from up here. They searched the fissure's entrance more carefully, brushing the stone. And then Marcus's hand closed around something wedged into a crevice, a weathered, rectangular object, a walkie-talkie. For 6 years, the mountains had kept Jasmine's secret. Now, they had finally spoken. The men dialed 911 on their satellite phone. Within hours, deputies and state investigators were on scene. The area transformed into a hub of urgency. Ropes were rigged, specialists lowered into the pit. At the bottom, they found the sleeping bag and backpack, weathered, decayed, but recognizable. Andrew Kensington arrived to confirm it himself. His sister's patch, sewn years ago onto the strap, was still there. It was Jasmine's pack, but there was no body. The sleeping bag was unrolled, as though someone had used it. The pack was partly open, its contents spilled, but no bones, no remains, no trace of death. Above ground, investigators studied the walkie-talkie. Its casing was dirty, corroded, but when plugged into diagnostic equipment, it showed a faint charge. The batteries inside weren't alkaline, they were lithium. And here lay the revelation that turned the case upside down. Based on degradation levels, those batteries had been active not since 2017, but within the last 18 months. Someone had placed that radio in the fissure in 2022. Jasmine Kensington, or someone who had once been with her, had been alive 5 years after she disappeared. The wilderness hadn't claimed her. Something else had happened. And the mystery of what that was only beginning to unravel. Detective Wallace stood at the mouth of the fissure as the cave rescue team descended into the darkness. The rope systems looked almost surgical, brightly coloured anchors, pulleys, and carabiners glowing against the muted forest tones. It wasn't just a search anymore. It was a recovery, an excavation, maybe even the beginning of answers that had eluded everyone for 6 long years. From below, voices crackled through helmet radios. The rescuers confirmed what Marcus had seen: a weathered blue sleeping bag, a beige frame backpack, partially unzipped, spilling contents across the damp stone. The gear was carefully photographed, bagged, and winched to the surface. When Andrew Kensington arrived, his face tightened as soon as he saw the strap. A patch stitched years ago by Jasmine's own hand, bright thread against faded fabric. It was hers. But there was no body, no bones, no trace of human remains, just silence, damp air, and the strange presence of that walkie-talkie. Wallace took the radio himself, slipping it into an evidence bag. It was unremarkable, small, plastic, scuffed, yet it seemed to hum with menace. Later, when forensic technician Sarah cracked it open, She found what no one expected. The lithium batteries weren't 6 years old. They'd been used within the last 18 months. Jasmine's radio had been transmitting as recently as 2022. The implication landed like thunder. Jasmine had survived. The fissure was only the beginning. Speleologists, cave mapping experts were brought in to chart the underground system. What they uncovered was staggering. The pit opened into a vast labyrinth. Miles of tunnels, narrow passages, and hidden chambers stretching unseen beneath the mountains. It wasn't just a cave. It was an entire underworld. And inside that underworld, the investigators found signs of life. Near a wide, arched entrance nearly half a mile from the pit, they discovered a dry alcove. There, blackened stones formed a crude fire ring. Ashes revealed layers of use, charcoal from different wood species built up over time. It wasn't a single blaze. It was a hearth, a place someone had returned to, again and again. Scattered nearby were brittle animal bones, squirrels, rabbits, even cave birds, along with sharpened sticks hardened by fire, primitive tools, spears. It painted a picture almost too haunting to believe. Jasmine hadn't died in that pit. She had survived it. Maybe her backpack had cushioned her fall. Maybe adrenaline had kept her alive. Broken, battered. She had used the radio, tried to climb, perhaps even thrown it upward in desperation, hoping its beacon would reach the outside world. When she realized she couldn't get back, she must have crawled through the tunnels. Eventually, she would have seen it, the miracle of daylight spilling through that larger exit. She had walked out of the dark, alive. But her survival didn't end the nightmare, it deepened it. If she had found her way out in 2017 or 2018, why hadn't she contacted anyone? Why hadn't she come back to her brother? Why hadn't she walked straight into a ranger station or a town? Wallace considered the most terrifying answer. Maybe she had tried. Maybe she had escaped the cave, only to step directly into another trap, another predator. The theory seemed to align with the other hiker's murder in 2019. Maybe Jasmine had survived the wild, only to encounter something even worse, a human threat waiting on the other side of the tree line. Still, the evidence in the cave was undeniable. She had lived there, hunted there, cooked meals by firelight. She had endured. The trail didn't end there. Months later, chance delivered another shock. A hunter named George Petrie retrieved memory cards from his remote trail cameras. Most of the footage showed deer, raccoons, bears, but one clip stopped him cold. The timestamp read August 14th, 2022, 4:52 a.m. A gaunt figure appeared in the grainy infrared image, clothes in tatters, long matted hair. The figure walked with weary determination, then turned slightly at the faint click of the camera. For a few frames, the profile was clear, high cheekbones, the shape of the jaw. It was Jasmine Kensington. George's coffee went cold as he replayed the clip over and over. He had seen her face on the news when the cave discovery hit the region. There was no doubt in his mind. It was her, alive, walking, just over a year earlier. The footage was given to the sheriff's department. Wallace watched it in silence, awe mixing with dread. The timeline fit perfectly. The batteries in the radio, the survival evidence in the cave, it all converged on this moment. Jasmine had escaped. She was alive. She had been moving towards civilization. The camera's location was less than 20 miles from the cave's larger entrance. The overgrown logging road it overlooked eventually led to a paved state highway, just 5 miles further on. Jasmine had been so close, 5 miles from rescue, 5 miles from life returning to normal. And yet, the trail ended there. No motorist remembered seeing her. No trucker reported picking up a hitchhiker. No business owner recalled a ragged woman wandering the roadside. Jasmine had walked into the lens of that camera, and then into nothingness. The trail camera footage should have been the breakthrough everyone was waiting for. It proved Jasmine had survived the cave. It proved she had walked away, flesh and blood, a survivor who defied every expectation. But instead of bringing closure, the images only fractured the investigation into darker, more unsettling questions. Detective Wallace and his team were forced to confront a possibility they had avoided for years. If Jasmine had been alive in 2022, then her disappearance wasn't the tragic story of a hiker lost to nature. It was a human story. Someone had helped her, or someone had hurt her. The circle of suspects was painfully small. And inevitably, the spotlight turned once again toward Nathan Coldridge. He was the man who was supposed to hike with her. The man who cancelled at the last moment. The man who, in theory, could have had both motive and opportunity. When investigators dug deeper into his past, they found something they had overlooked in the early days of the case. In 2017, Nathan had been drowning in debt. Credit card advances at casino ATMs, large, unexplained withdrawals, debt collectors hounding him. He had been desperate. The theory formed quickly, almost too perfectly. Desperation breeds reckless ideas. What if Nathan had needed money badly enough to concoct something dark? What if Jasmine's disappearance wasn't random, but orchestrated? Perhaps there was a hidden life insurance policy. Or perhaps Jasmine herself had been a pawn in a scheme he thought he could control. It was speculation, but it was enough to drag him into the harsh glow of suspicion. This time, the meeting with Nathan didn't take place in a quiet coffee shop. It was in an interrogation room at the county sheriff's office. Grey walls, metal table, 2 detectives sitting across from him, their eyes fixed and unblinking. At first, Nathan looked bewildered, then frightened. Wallace slid a folder across the table, bank statements, casino records, proof of debts he had tried to bury. His face flushed. "Yes, I had a problem," Nathan admitted, his voice shaking. "I was gambling. I was stupid. I ruined myself. But that was my mistake. That has nothing to do with Jasmine." The questions came sharper, faster. Did Jasmine know about his debts? Did they fight about it? Was his sudden illness just a cover? Could he have staged an alibi while orchestrating her disappearance? The implication was suffocating, that he hadn't just abandoned Jasmine, but had somehow kept her hidden for years. Nathan crumbled under the pressure, but his story never broke. He insisted on his innocence, admitted to the gambling addiction, but swore it ended long ago. The detectives already had the answers in hand. They had pulled his complete clinic records from 2017, along with a credit card receipt time-stamped during Jasmine's departure. The attending physician, now retired, still remembered treating him for dehydration so severe it would have been nearly impossible to fake. And then there was the matter of his debts. The investigation uncovered how Nathan had escaped them, not through crime, but through an inheritance in 2018, a modest $50,000 from a great-aunt. It was public record, legitimate, and more than enough to wipe his slate clean. After 4 hours of interrogation, the conclusion was unavoidable. Nathan Coldridge wasn't their suspect. He was a man with mistakes in his past, but not a killer. He walked out of the sheriff's office pale and shaken, a man forever linked to a mystery he could not escape but could never answer. For Wallace, frustration boiled over. They had chased their strongest lead into a dead end. If Nathan wasn't responsible, then who was? And if no one was responsible, then what was Jasmine's story? The only witness left was the cave itself. The forensic sweep turned meticulous, almost obsessive. Floodlights illuminated the cavern like a crime lab. Every corner was sifted, every trace examined. What emerged was not a scene of captivity, but a chronicle of survival. The fire pit, the animal bones, the crude hunting tools, layers of ash, proof of dozens of meals cooked over months, maybe years. It told a story more incredible and more tragic than anything Wallace had imagined. Jasmine had likely fallen into the fissure. Her pack cushioned the impact, leaving her battered but alive. In desperation, she had tried to use the radio, maybe even wedging it into the crevice in a frantic attempt to send a signal. Then, through pain and darkness, she had crawled her way into the labyrinth. She had found the walkout entrance. She had emerged into daylight. She had survived. But survival in the wilderness was only half the battle. The trail camera footage showed her gaunt but walking with purpose, heading toward the highway, just 5 miles from civilization, just 5 miles from salvation. And then, silence. The possibilities grew darker by the day. Some believed she had chosen to disappear. starting a new life in the shadows. But those who knew her best rejected that theory. Jasmine loved her brother. She wouldn't have abandoned him. The more likely and more horrifying answer was that she had survived everything the wilderness threw at her, only to encounter a predator when she was finally free. Her story, Wallace realized, wasn't about nature's cruelty. It was about the cruelty of people. The trail camera footage ignited a storm of attention, grainy though it was. The image of Jasmine Kensington walking that overgrown path in August 2022 became the centerpiece of a renewed public search. Her face, thinner, aged by hardship but unmistakably hers, was splashed across newspapers, local broadcasts, and online forums. Detective Wallace authorized a massive canvass. Flyers went up at truck stops, diners, and gas stations within a 50-mile radius of the highway near where the camera had caught her. Deputies knocked on doors in small mountain towns, asking anyone if they had seen a gaunt woman walking alone that summer. Drivers were interviewed, truckers questioned. But no one remembered. No one recalled a ragged woman at dawn, only 5 miles from a paved road. It was as though Jasmine had stepped into the camera's lens, and then into thin air. Wallace replayed the clip obsessively, the timestamp, the way she turned her head at the faint click, the steady determination in her gait. She wasn't staggering blindly. She was walking with intent, heading toward life, toward salvation. And then, nothing. The theory split the case into 2 cruel possibilities. The first, whispered by optimists, was that Jasmine had chosen to vanish. That after years of surviving alone, she decided she couldn't return to her old life. That she shed her past and walked into anonymity. But Andrew Kensington rejected this outright. He knew his sister. Jasmine was fierce, independent, but she would never abandon him willingly. Not after everything, not after the bond they shared. The darker theory was harder to ignore, that she had survived the impossible, years of isolation, hunger, injury, only to encounter the one predator more dangerous than any wild animal. A human being. Perhaps a driver on that lonely highway. Perhaps someone she trusted just enough to take a ride. If that was true, her story was not one of escape, but of tragedy stretched across years. A miracle undone by a single encounter. The months after the footage broke were filled with dead ends. Anonymous tips flooded in, most of them worthless. A woman hitchhiking in another state, a stranger living off-grid, a recluse in a mountain shack. Each lead evaporated under scrutiny. By early 2024, the search had cooled again. The clip of Jasmine remained the last concrete proof of her existence. And yet, her story had already transcended evidence. It had become legend among hikers, whispered along the Appalachian Trail like a cautionary tale. The mountains, people said, had a way of swallowing souls. But in Jasmine's case, the truth was crueler. The mountains had let her go. It was the world outside that had silenced her. For Andrew, the grief never softened. He kept the trail camera image framed beside the old photo of her smiling on that mossy tree branch. 2 sides of a life split apart by mystery. He clung to the hope that maybe, somehow, she had found peace, though not the peace he had prayed for. Detective Wallace, too, kept her file on his desk long after protocol dictated it be archived. For him, it was unfinished business, a ghost that stared back every time he flipped open the manila folder. He knew the truth might never come. He knew the trail had ended on that overgrown logging road. But sometimes, late at night, he would replay the grainy clip one more time. He would watch Jasmine Kensington walk steadily through the infrared lens, thin and weary but alive, the echo of survival burning in every frame. And he would feel the same cold question that had haunted him since the day the radio was pulled from that fissure. How could someone fight so hard to live, only to disappear when freedom was within reach? The Appalachians keep their secrets. But in Jasmine's case, it wasn't the mountains that swallowed her. It was us, the world she fought to return to, the world that failed her. Her story ends not in the silence of the wilderness, but in the silence of a highway shoulder at dawn, 5 miles from salvation. A silence no search team, no camera, no detective has ever been able to break. If Jasmine's story sent chills down your spine, if it left you with more questions than answers, you're not alone. The silence of the Appalachians still holds her fate, and perhaps it always will. What do you believe happened to Jasmine Kensington after that final sighting? Did she vanish by choice? Or was she taken by something far darker? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more haunting stories of disappearances, mysteries, and cold cases the world has tried to forget, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Because these stories don't just fade with time, they wait in the shadows until someone is willing to remember.